So our project is over if social media is a public forum for free speech. And free speech in the digital age, the First Amendment protects five key freedoms, and those are speech, religion, press, assembly, and petition. And the purpose of our topic is to explore how free speech applies in online spaces. And a quote from a peer reviewed article over free speech and democracy in the video age says that a fundamental element of speech theory involves determining what, beyond the obvious category of spoken or written words, counts as speech and therefore is potentially entitled to the First Amendment protection. And all of that raises the question of, do these same protections extend to the social media platforms that everybody uses? So when we're talking about that, we have to talk about where the speech happens and the public forum doctrine. The definition of the public forum doctrine is a legal doctrine used in the First Amendment jurisprudence to determine the extent of free speech and protections on government property. So some types of public forums are traditional ones like streets, parks, and sidewalks, and then there's designated ones such as government spaces open for the public like town halls and etc. And then there's non-public ones like military bases and airports and schools. So the legal significance of this is that government restrictions depend on the forum type. So, like, for example, the highest in protection is the traditional forums and the lowest is the non-public ones. And then, so free speech has evolved a lot with technology and major communication revolutions, such as, going from the printing press to social media, which is a huge, gap. And each era has expanded who could speak and how widely messages could spread amongst the population. And digital platforms now enable instant global communication, but it also raises new challenges about the moderation and access. And the shift from public spaces like town squares and etc. to digital spaces raises new First Amendment questions.
So there are a couple Supreme Court cases that are very important when it comes to social media and free speech. The first of which is kind of a series of two cases. It's Moody versus NetChoice and NetChoice versus Paxton. NetChoice LLC challenged two laws, one in Florida and one in Texas, that allowed state governments to prevent social medias from moderating certain content posted on their websites. It had to do with banning political figures and banning speech from certain accounts that the laws were about. In Florida, the law was struck down by local courts as unconstitutional, but in Texas, the law that was very similar was allowed to go into effect. So the Supreme Court decided to hear both of these cases together. In the first NetChoice case, which was the one that was in Florida, the court there held that social media companies were protected by the First Amendment in their content moderation activities, as the act of moderating the content was deemed to be speech. And then in NetChoice 2, which is NetChoice versus Paxton, the Texas court, they prohibited social media platforms from censoring the speech of users, and the court held that the law doesn't really just kind of infringes on people's free speech because the social media platforms aren't the one doing the speech. The people speaking are the ones doing the speech on social media. The Supreme Court kind of vacated both of these rulings because they deemed that the courts did not do enough look into the First Amendment effects of these cases, and they sent these laws back down to the lower courts to be done again. And this was all from a research paper by Stella Preston. And then the other big case that I looked at was Linkey versus Freed. This case decided if public officials were allowed to block citizens from social media accounts that they used for government business. Freed was an elected official who had blocked Linkey, who was a critic of his on social media. And the Supreme Court ruled that public officials can only be held liable for blocking users when they are both speaking on behalf of the state and exercising that power with their posts. Public officials are allowed to block people from just their personal social media accounts, but if they have an official account where they only post government business, they're not allowed to block people from that because that's a free speech violation. So some of the impacts of these legal cases and that social media platforms are allowed to moderate your posts as they see fit, and you don't have absolute free speech on social media. You can still get banned from a social media website because they're a private company and they don't have to respect your particular freedom of speech, because them banning you can also be seen as a form of their freedom of speech. And you can still get in legal trouble for posts you make online, for example, if you make a threat or something. If you're a politician, mixing official posts and personal posts on your social media could potentially land you in legal trouble, which is why a lot of politicians will have separate accounts for their personal posts and for their campaign posts as well.
Now to talk about social media and free speech in practice. Social media platforms and companies can control speech in ways similar to governments in the past. According to a study done by Frederick Mostert, social media has become the new public square, and platforms like Facebook and X remove or suspend users to protect its image. These suspensions or removals occur when someone reports a post or sometimes when an automated system could flag it. The problem that Mostert found is that many platforms will take down content from parody accounts, political commentary, or even just controversial opinions. There's no way to challenge it under the First Amendment. This issue is controversial because different groups see moderation of social media in different lights. A study found that Democrats view censorship of prejudiced posts as protection. However, Republicans tend to view it as if they're being targeted or their opinions are invalid or offensive. Mostert explains that because these companies are privately owned, users don't have their constitutional free speech rights, which has led to debates about who gets to decide what counts as hate speech, the user, the government, or the platform. Some of the data I found, it was some numbers in a study done by Solomon, Scott, and Hall. The most censored posts are hate against black people or other racial groups and LGBTQ community. The least censored posts are about political opinions. In the study, they found that 74% of people support the censorship of hate speech and that 43% support the censorship of political opinions. These numbers show that people are more comfortable with the censorship of hate speech rather than political commentary. And the effects this has on public discourse is that moderation shapes who is actually heard among these public spaces. Platforms control the main channels of communication today, so people who align with the views of platforms can feel more encouraged to speak, while those who may have opposing views of these platforms may have fear of losing their account or possibly the job if it has to do with the company.
All right, so now we're going to talk about the role of social media in journalism. In today's day and age, social media plays a large role in journalism. Social media and websites has surpassed newspapers, and the journalism world has to adapt. Unlike newspapers where you have to wait to print news, news can now be shown directly to everybody's phones through social media. Social media helps spread news to underserved markets, and it helps journalists spread messages to people who aren't seeking out news through the algorithm. It puts more eyes on journalism and the messages they want to get out. Social media also provides real-time updates. These real-time updates can help out a lot in the event of breaking news. These advancements have made it so journalists and organizations race to get stories out by the millisecond. Social media also gives the audience a chance to interact with different journalists and see other sides of the story. Social media has made it to where audiences don't have to always interact with a journalist to get news. To spread the word of news, people can post their own news to social media. There are some challenges to social media, though. Misinformation's a big one. It ties back to free speech because people use their free speech to confuse the audience and to cause harm through fake news. Because of how easy it is to share news, people can put out whatever they want, and most viewers scrolling through their feed won't think twice to fact check, and they'll end up believing fake news. Social media has started to add AI fact checkers and AI features to its platforms, but those don't always work. For example, a BBC article that was written as an April Fool's joke got presented as real by Google's AI. Social media also challenges free speech by shadow banning members of their platform. According to Slovenian's 2020 article on shadow banning is when a social media platform silences a user and their content doesn't get pushed through the algorithm and the content becomes hard to search for. Social media platforms can stop messages they don't want to be broadcast from being seen, and this is a First Amendment issue. For example, in 2018, X, formerly known as Twitter, got accused of shadow banning members of the Republican Party. Social media platforms such as Instagram and X deny shadow banning happening on their platforms. According to Yin Shao and Tauhid in 2020, shadow banning can be harmful because it blocks information from getting out, but it can be used for good, such as restricting harmful accounts. Some key points are, since social media companies are privately owned, users do not have the right to free speech. The First Amendment protects 5 key freedoms, that is speech, religion, press, assembly, and petition, but social media is not a public forum. Public speaking moved from physical spaces to digital spaces, and if silenced on social media, there is no way to challenge under the First Amendment. People are more comfortable with censoring hate speech, but not politics. Moderation can make people not want to speak out anymore. Social media also puts more eyes on journalism, and social media confuses people through fake news.
Our reflection from this project and our topic is basically that the First Amendment has had challenges due to how social media platforms are privately owned spaces, and the First Amendment's 5 key freedoms don't specifically apply on them. The shift from public spaces to digital spaces for public speaking has left users confused on what they can and cannot say in these apps, and what will be censored due to the platform's terms of services. If people are silenced on social media, there's no way to challenge that under the First Amendment. And then we got our sources. That's it.